There's a lot of kids out there who need your help, and a donation to St. Jude could potentially save them. Link to my fundraiser is in the description. Before I begin this video, I just want to be safe and make clear that anything I say in this video and every other video of mine is not made to connect to any controversy that has happened or is currently happening in the real world, including the current SAG-AFTRA strikes. I may not know the full story as to how Insomniac Games, the developers of today's game, is involved in this, or how it's going to be affected, but given they're on a list of video game companies who will be affected by what's currently happening, I just want to make sure that just because I give loads of positivity towards a company's product, it doesn't mean that I condone everything happening behind the scenes. I believe you can absolutely acknowledge how you feel about a product's quality, while still taking real matters seriously and being critical when it's necessary. Regardless if this issue gets worse or not, I just want to make sure there's little feelings of suspicion as possible. Thank you, and enjoy the show. Alright, let's do this one last time. My name is Jack Stevenson. I was never bitten by a radioactive spider, and for 10 years, I've been the one and only Jack the Lightning Ripper.
I'm pretty sure you know the rest.
I played a bunch of games, met some new friends, made some videos, and I made more and more and more videos. And, I did this!
A good chunk of my real-life friends don't have a lot of experience with Ratchet & Clank and enjoyed the movie just fine. Heck, one of them even said the movie was an underdog and really deserved more praise.
We don't really talk about this, but even after everything I've been through, and even considering my real life, I still love being Jack the Lightning Ripper. No matter how much I've been washed up by the algorithm, I've always found a way to make others happy. And that's the biggest thing I care about.
There's only one Jack the Lightning Ripper. And you're looking at him.
I gotta tell you, these past few years have been an amazing time to be a fan of Spider-Man. Between all the amazing movies and games we've gotten, I've begun to understand what it is about Spidey that I love so much. I already enjoyed Spider-Man back in the mid-2000s and early 2010s, though there is some Spidey media from back then I wish I experienced sooner, but ever since Into the Spider-Verse and Spider-Man 2018 came out, I've grown to really appreciate the web-slinger even more. Very deserving for one of Marvel's most iconic characters. I was originally going to review the 2018 game back when it was relatively fresh on the shelves, but then this thing called life happened, I was more interested in making other videos, and I just moved on. Besides, many viewers are probably familiar with past videos where I sung my praises for it, but to be fair, it has been a little while since I last played this. So since I want to revive video ideas I've had in hibernation for some time, and we're due for a sequel this October, which you bet I'll be getting day one, I decided to revisit this game and give my general thoughts on it in review form. Now, despite there being a remaster that allows for higher frame rates, I'm personally choosing to stick with the original PS4 release for this one. I want to be smart with my money for future movies and games and all that, not to mention important life stuff, but I actually don't mind playing this game at 30 frames whatsoever. In fact, it feels very natural, and I think having the option for 60 frames would be a nice bonus, rather than a necessity. I'll get more into that when I get to the presentation part, though I will say that despite not feeling cheated out by not having the presentation benefits of the remaster, despite initially needing to pay extra for the DLC that came out a few months after the original release, nowadays, it's just more worth it to get the remaster on PS5 or PC because of those extra performance options, and because those versions come with the DLC already included. So, here we are. But before we start the review, I'd just like to let you know that I'm continuing my Play Life campaign for St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. The doctors who work there would dearly appreciate your donations if it means they can continue their work to save the lives of sick kids. Link is in the description below, and depending on how much you donate, you'll win special rewards from getting to offer a countdown or a review idea to getting a vocal cameo of some kind. Thank you so much, and thank you to Bubble Hyde and Anonymous Donor for their contributions. Yeah, I'm gonna try and put messages for my campaigns at the start of every video, just so we can get more traction, and it'd be a good way to remind myself to give shoutouts to eligible donors. Now, let's swing into action! The story immediately gets points in my book for starting off with Peter Parker already a Spider-Man. Instead of going through the motions of getting bitten by the spider, Uncle Ben dying and all that, they briefly cover how Peter's life has been up to when the game begins, through a camera pan of pictures, newspaper covers, and magazine covers. This is cool because it gives you a basic understanding as to who this version of Peter is to everyone, and what he's accomplished so far, even to those who don't know what a Spider-Man is. It just gets to the point, and the gameplay you want to see. Very smart move on the devs' part. Anyways, when the game begins, Spidey joins up with the New York police force in a raid on Fisk Tower to apprehend Wilson Fisk, aka the Kingpin. The raid is successful and Fisk is arrested, but it's a short-lived victory as not long afterwards, an organization known as the Demons come to run amok. They're after what's known as Devil's Breath, an experiment that was intended to be a cure for any illness, but is incredibly flawed in its current state, and could spread a life-threatening virus to anyone who comes in contact with it. So the game is mostly about stopping them and preventing it from being misused to kill millions, but to leave it as simply that would not cover how the situation escalates with all the additional players and the overall characterization, which is personally what makes this otherwise simple narrative very enjoyable. This version of Peter is legitimately very charming in both personas. I find it easy to buy that he's generally been through a lot throughout the years, and yet always manages to keep his best traits at the forefront, while not making him too perfect, like always being behind on his rent, having trouble balancing his real jobs at both Feast, a charity where Aunt May works at, and at Dr. Otto Octavius' lab, with being Spidey. And as Spidey, they really nailed how much of a smart mouth he can generally be with the numerous quips he has towards criminals, and even once he has to play around with his allies.
From his elevated position, Spider Cop spies his destination. A second surveillance tower.
Are you narrating yourself?
What? No! Of course not! The Chief never did understand Spider Cop. Thought he was a loose cannon.
Already regretting this.
I'm also happy that this game legit tries to make Mary Jane much more than just being someone for Peter to save. In fact, I can only recall one time where she actually gets caught, but it's believable given how it's a full-blown hostage situation, and the fight back is her and Spider-Man working together to free the other hostages and leave the demons vulnerable, which is very refreshing. There are a select number of times where she legit tries to be helpful, not to mention, she and Peter do have believable chemistry. It is understandable why they start off broken up. In fact, they kind of use that to address the damsel in distress stigma MJ has had for a while in a smart and clever way that doesn't make her look like a blank slate. And it is nice to see them try and build a relationship back up without it feeling recycled. In fact, every side character Peter comes across has something interesting to offer, down to the likes of Jefferson Davis, Miles Morales, Aunt May, Martin Lee, and Otto Octavius. But let's talk about those last two, because they've got a lot of interesting things about them that basically goes into spoilers. So you can skip to this time mark if you don't want me spoiling anything. So Martin Lee is introduced as the owner of Feast, and is generally portrayed as someone who wants to help those who have nowhere to go, but in actuality, he's leading the aforementioned demons in their campaign for Devil's Breath, going under the alias of Mr. Negative. Lee is a very star-driven individual, as his powers come from Norman Osborn putting him through Devil's Breath experiments that ended up killing his parents. For context of why Norman Osborn will be using something like this, he's looking for a way to cure an illness that his son Harry currently has. So needless to say, it's not quite ready. It is really sad to see Lee stoop down so low to a point where he'd willingly harm others in order to sully Osborn's reputation, but you can see how he got to that point, and that's why I really like him as an antagonist. Dr. Octavius was handled wonderfully too. So as the game is beginning, Otto's just a scientist Peter works for who wants to help people out through his inventions. Throughout the game, Otto's shown to be a very kind individual who wants the best for Peter and everyone in New York, even designing a few gadgets and suit alterations for Spider-Man, and the bond he and Peter share is legitimately endearing. But thanks to the falling out with Norman he had prior to the game, and Norman also trying to squander his company's potential, yeah, Norman's not a very nice guy, sadly, Otto's pushed past his limit, and he becomes the villainous Dr. Octopus. But something I like about this is how the game doesn't treat it like a plot twist, but instead as a character motivator, focusing on how it emotionally affects Peter and even Otto himself. It is sad to see such a kind scientist become this monster, but again, you can see how he got to that point. That's where I feel this narrative shines the most. It's able to take some tropes you're probably familiar with, and both give you a reason to care and feel what everyone is going through. It's not a narrative that takes itself too seriously, bringing in plenty of lighthearted moments, but it also knows when to dial it back, let everyone breathe, and let a moment sink in. I will also happily give it credit that doesn't rely on anyone's previous Spider-Man knowledge in order to follow any of its events, especially with how this is set 8 years after this Peter became Spider-Man. You just get how everyone ended up where they are, and the relationships they have. Even down to villains like the ones recruited in this game's Sinister Six, which happens in the last third of the game. The story can stand on its own two legs, and is better off for it. It always kept me engaged, and there was never a moment where I groaned because of bad writing, which is really all I need for a game like this. And that's just the main campaign. There's also much smaller stories and side quests involving villains such as Black Cat, Screwball, Tombstone, and Taskmaster, which are far more straightforward in comparison. In fact, they're mostly just there to add more meat to the side quests, which is fine. And then there's the DLC, The City That Never Sleeps. This has its own little stories to tell that only follow up on smaller motivations that are mostly footnotes in the base game, while adding in plenty of more threats while it's at it. These stories mostly revolve around what escalates from the deeds conducted by Hammerhead, leader of the Magia. But again, it's mostly the characterization that makes it fun. Yuri Watanabe is explored a lot more and put through the ringer quite a bit. Black Cat is given more of an arc with her forcibly working for Hammerhead, and there being more between her and Pierre that the base game alluded to, and some other villains like Screwball get a lot more to do. It's a good way to add on to an already satisfying narrative without it feeling like a necessity. You don't need the DLC to get the full story, so both are able to stay on their own legs, while still having a select number of connections that don't feel forced. So no matter what, the stories are all well told and feel like they wanted to do more than just write something simple and easy, which I will happily acknowledge. I will always prefer more cartoony art directions for video games because of the amount of freedom you have to express personality in them, but I can appreciate it when a game makes a more realistic art style work. It doesn't always happen, especially in those instances where it comes off as companies wanting to show off what current tech is capable of, or appeal to people who obsess about the pores on a character's face on social media, but when done well, it can be stylish in its own way. Spider-Man 2018 absolutely realizes this, as it keeps the focus on making everything look good, rather than look as real as possible. They use a lot of motion capture in the cutscenes, and while there might be a design or an animation that looks a tad off every once in a while, every facial and body movement looks just right. Not overly rigid, but not so flaccid and over the top. But the one thing I love the most about these cutscenes is that they're all rendered in real time, meaning any costume you are wearing at the moment will be in it. I love it when games can pull this off. I can pretend this is a movie in a particular Spidey film saga, look as ridiculous as possible and ruin the mood, or pick the perfect costume for this cutscene where Miles punches Spidey. They even went as far as to animate smaller segments of Spidey riding a subway whenever you're fast traveling. These are super charming just to see him do something completely arbitrary, like talking with the locals or browsing his phone, one of which has him doing that while this guy is probably judging him. There's even a couple of him taking the exterior to reflect the plot beat. That's a level of detail I'd love to see. Voice acting in these cutscenes? Absolutely top-notch. I love everyone's enthusiasm for their particular roles, and how well they stick to what kind of character they're playing in general. I love Najee Jeter's bright attitude as Miles, and how he handled the more serious moments. Nancy Lenari is fantastic as Aunt May. Laura Bailey is probably among my favorite voices for Mary Jane for what I've seen. Stephen Young absolutely nails Martin Lee. And man, William Salyers deserves an award for his performance as Dr. Octavius. There's also a couple voice actors here I am happy to see get roles, like Travis Willingham, Tara Platt, Erica Lindbeck, Keith Silverstein, and Josh Keaton, the last of whom has voiced Spidey himself in a number of projects, funny enough. But of course, I cannot go without mentioning Yuri Lowenthal's performance as the Webhead. I've made it no secret that I'm a huge fan of Yuri Lowenthal, and this role is probably one of my personal favorites from him. It's perfect for the genuine kindness and intelligence of Peter, and the snarkiness and quick-film mouth of Spider-Man. But whenever things get far more dramatic, he pulls that off spectacularly as well. Every line from him is a genuine treat, and I am really happy that other Marvel media has let him hold on to this role. But the visual and audio style even helps the gameplay feel grander. I love how the lighting engine makes everything you're doing in the game look like it could potentially translate into a beautiful comic panel, especially during the evening and night times. Each animation in combat and whip-slinging flows very naturally into one another, and even if the soundtrack is pretty standard, like some of you'd hear of a modern superhero film, I enjoy listening to it more as I see Spidey stopping crime, or just swinging around. That, or listening to a phone call between Peter and another major character, or to one of J. Jonah Jameson's podcasts. Those podcasts can especially get hilarious when Jameson has a guest star that he ends up misconstruing the story for, or if he yells at Jared.
Pardon me, ma'am, I didn't hear that last part over my intern's utter incompetence. You realize, of course, that it's possible Spider-Man arranged the kidnapping so he could save your husband and grab all the glory?
That seems like a lot of trouble to go to when he could just stop actual crime.
It's clear we are at an impasse. My best to you and your husband, madam. Jared, go to commercial, then fire yourself. Then rehire yourself before the commercial ends. But no, your job hangs by a thread. If I paid you, I'd cut your salary in half.
Only thing I will say about these is that the speed in which Spidey can swing to his next objective or run to a crime is fast enough that it could interrupt the session. So getting most out of these requires slowing down and waiting. It's not a massive issue, and during street crimes, it's good that they added in the detail of Peter briefly hanging up and resuming after things are done. But it did happen enough to where it got noticeable. But I'm glad to witness it all in action with how the game is optimized, because no matter what the version, the game barely has any slowdown or input delay, and stays at its frame rate at all times. And because the game isn't expecting loads out of you in terms of reflexes, I feel perfectly comfortable playing this game at 30 frames per second. Everything is able to flow naturally, and still look great to the point where I don't need 60 frames just to make everything look better. Though I absolutely welcome the option in the remaster on PS5 and PC. Anything to make the game more appealing to those who vastly prefer 60 frames. For the most part, the game is polished as is, but every once in a while, there is a glitch that might pop up, and there might be some jank here and there. Granted, throughout this playthrough, the only really bad one I got is this prompt being weird and a crime, locking me out from completing it and forcing me to reset. Spider-Man, I'm trapped! Help me out! Don't worry, I'll help you out. Hi there, but there are a select number of others here and there. It's not a broken mess, don't misunderstand me there, but there are a couple of minor cracks. At this point, any other issues I can note with the presentation are either nitpicks or things you actively have to try to look for. Everything else is not only handled with care for optimization, but is also made with love towards the source material in mind that really does go a long way in making the adventure feel more special. The lovely city, the enjoyable cutscenes, and all the touches in the animation to really make it feel like a Spider-Man experience for everyone just all work in perfect harmony with one another. Well, I guess it's time to talk about what you likely bought the game for. Playing as a superhero. And honestly, I am so satisfied with how well they pulled it off. Spider-Man is already capable of a lot once you start a new game. He's got combat moves on the ground and the air, some moves that can knock enemies into the air, and a web shooter that recharges when you're not using it, that can be used to web up enemies and get them ready to be thrown. He can throw objects lying around, his Spider Sense can sense incoming attacks, giving you an idea for what the best window to dodge should be, and he has this focus meter that can act as a way to heal himself in case he takes pot shots, but a full focus meter can also be used to perform finishers that instantly take down any enemy you're locked onto. That is all again when you start a new game. It might take a little bit to get used to, but I don't feel like the game is overloading you with mechanics. The beginning at Fist Tower may be tense, but the tutorials are placed in just the right places so you can take in what you're doing and get an idea of what you can do with what you have later on. It is still a lot though, and I will admit, it took me a while to get right when I played this game way back when it first came out, and maybe slipping into a new file with all the upgrades I got from a first playthrough with a little trouble was likely muscle memory coming back to me. But I think it'll be something you'll get the hang of at just the right moments, and grow along with it whenever you get something new to play with. Spidey in terms of gadgets always starts out with those web shooters, which still do get some use even until endgame, because of their high ammo count that regenerates, and how generally spammable they are. But it gets a lot more as you go along to help diversify encounters. My favorites would have to be the impact web, because when a wall is in range of an enemy, I can just catapult them into that wall with this gadget, which is an instant kill. The little spider buddy, which fires on enemies in range, which helps with my combo and stunning them, and the trap mine because of how practical it is on both walls and the backs of those mooks. And it's just funny seeing one of them get yoinked towards someone or something. Combat might seem relatively straightforward at first, as depending on the enemy, punching and juggling can yield solid results, but I believe they're not necessarily just about looking cool, but also strategically using the formations and the environment to deliver quick takedowns. You still have your gadgets to even the playing field, but there can be something in the environment to help out with crowds, and good use of the Spider Sense will help you out big time. And with the upgrades you can get from the skill trees and the suit abilities, you can potentially clear mobs very quickly, and you have more to work with for boss encounters. There aren't that many, but they're all good tests of analyzing weaknesses and exploiting them. Easy standouts go to the last two bosses of the main game, as they both showcase what both of the characters are all about, and wrap up the game in a climactic way. The skill tree upgrades come in all flavors, like giving you new moves that can lead to more combos, and faster ways to approach fights, and are dictated by an experience bar that you fill out by stopping crimes, completing story missions and side quests, or just by doing anything the world provides. More on that in a bit. The suit powers are also immensely handy. You can equip a move that you can use by clicking the analog stick buttons that'll give you an edge, ranging from a stronger spider buddy that electrocutes anyone in the vicinity, to an area effect move with massive range, to a web shower that can potentially deal with multiple gangsters at once. Most of these are linked to the myriad of costumes you can purchase either by fulfilling objectives or providing the proper tokens for it. And what I love about this is that while each power comes with a new suit, it's not permanently bound to it. So if you want to use a move that you're really fond of until the end game, you don't need to stick with the suit it came with. And it goes both ways. Actually, I'm going to take a detour for a minute and say that the suits are one of my favorite things about the game. This is a really good reward for exploring what the game has, and I love how most pay tribute to some part of Spider-Man's legacy. Customizing a character's appearance is one of my favorite things to do in a game, and this is a prime example of that. My favorite will always be the Iron Spider suit from the MCU films, because I love the coloration and the metal coating on it, but I'm also a massive fan of the Spider-Punk suit, because I always thought it looked eye-catching and funny in a good way, and now that I've seen it across the Spider-Verse, I like it even more. The Bagman suit, because I love looking as ridiculous as possible, and the Vintage suit, because I love the filter put on it to make it look 2D animated. You're also allowed to equip 3 passive perks at once to help you out. Stuff like getting more focus from certain attacks, taking less damage from projectiles, and modifying your damage output at certain health ranges. This one is a little more straightforward, but it still works for a reason, to let you decide on how you want to play the game. So I'm glad it's here. Getting all of the suits and these perks generally depends on the activities you decide to do. Now, in order to progress the story, you just gotta head to where the game tells you to when the time is right. No more, and no less. But there's still plenty to do in Manhattan besides those. A lot of it is combat-based, but I do enjoy how a lot of the side quests legit have little mini-stories just about everyday people having issues, because it feels good to help them. Especially this guy who wants to help fight the chaos, and does so by pretending to be Spider-Man. Some even have you in a tussle with a new villain, like Tombstone and Screwball, which is also really neat. P.S. Screwball doing a lot of what she does for social media clout, it's way too home for me after I see tons of clickbait videos. These bases are fun ROMs that provide different side objectives for more tokens, highlighting what you can truly do. Crimes are always fun to stop in progress, especially when you're on your way to your next objective. And then we have the challenges set by Taskmaster. I really enjoy these as an activity for full completion. There's a huge variety of them testing combat, stealth, and maneuverability, but then after beating half of them, Taskmaster will just cut the crap and engage you in combat, and that's really cool. Heck, rematching him after beating all of them is also a good reward. I also really enjoyed the other side work that doesn't bother with combat, like helping out environmental projects Harry Osborn left out for you, taking pictures of landmarks all over Manhattan, finding out that the Avengers are a thing in this world in the process, and fetching stuff like pigeons for a bird keeper, and backpacks that have fun items relating to this Peter's previous years, some of which are really funny, and others are just precious. Though I wonder how Peter explained going through 55 backpacks to Aunt May, or anyone else. And I wonder how people never noticed some of them, let alone removed them. The world has a lot of fun activities to do, and even if you're content with just doing the main campaign, you're still looking at a good weekend's worth of content. It does not overstay its welcome, and everything else is purely left up to your discretion. Now, I will say that even though Manhattan is a relatively large open world, though we're not talking Breath of the Wild type world large, I think that if it was only allowed to run, or use some standard form of transportation that isn't fast travel, like a car, traversal wouldn't be too fun. But in case you haven't caught on,
You're freaking Spider-Man!
and this brings me to easily my favorite part of the game, just web-slinging through Manhattan. Oh man, this feels absolutely wonderful. Heavenly even. The weight and speed feel absolutely perfect. There's loads of points that you can grapple towards and then immediately jump off of in order to keep things going. You can either do tricks in midair to build up focus, or dive before finding an opportunity to swing again, though there's no fall damage, so the only thing lost when hitting the ground is a smidge of time. And you can even shoot through specific structures if you want to show off. I do appreciate the fast travel system, but I was perfectly content with just doing this throughout a lot of my playtime. It really does help each activity flow well into one another. I never tire of just swinging around before taking a moment to do one of the main or side quests, or stop a crime in progress before I begin on my merry way, or go to do something cool for another one of my favorite things about the game, the photo mode. I always try to find good angles to get great shots of Spidey in action, or take a selfie when I'm in a particularly cool spot. And it's awe-inspiring just how many custom filters, frames, and stickers you have to style it up with. There aren't too many issues I personally take with the game in terms of how it plays, but there are a couple things I think could have been done a bit better. Firstly, the stealth sections, while still very fun, I think could have used a little bit of tuning, especially in the enemy bases. In these, unless the mission list asks you to get stealth kills, stealth isn't encouraged as much because when you get to wave 2, every enemy is immediately onto you with no way to hide. Personally, I would have liked a little more freedom to do these completely stealthily, or have a way to hide in case the situation calls for it. The hiding one is noticeable no matter what though, since if you're spotted, there really isn't much of a way to shake them unless you're in the right environment. And I mean, the right environment. While I do enjoy stopping crimes whenever I see one happening, fulfilling them for completion can get pretty boring. There are 4 different organizations causing crimes in them: regular thugs, the demons, prison escapees, and mercenaries from Sable International, and you have to stop 5 crimes from each of them for a total of 20 crimes per area for full completion. When you're just going about your way, I don't mind this, but when on cleanup duty trying to find one, it all drags the completion pacing down a lot. More often than not, it does take a bit for them to appear, especially when they're the only thing you have left. So all you have to do is just wait around or web sling in circles for one to pop up. Whenever this happens, I just feel like this part of completing the game is padding, and I'm glad that DLC campaigns reduce the number to just 5 per area, and only restrict them to the couple of areas the objectives lie in. Not to mention, Miles Morales addressed this with its Spider app. Heck, I think they thought of this here, because there are these secret photo locations that only appear on your minimap once you have the necessary equipable perk for it. Because the game hides these, I feel like they wanted you to web sling around anyways, and do them while waiting for a crime to show up. But because they only show up on the minimap, and when you use the scan radar mapped to the R3 button, and because they don't keep count of how many there are in an area, these are pretty take it or leave it for me. I say take it or leave it because thankfully these don't count towards 100% completion, nor do they count towards any trophies. They're only there if you want to have fun, or the ESU suit if you care about that. In fact, the only things that contribute to gaming completion are the listed tasks in the menu. You don't need to buy every suit, or perfect every single Taskmaster challenge, or anything like that. Just doing all of what the game lists on this menu is all you need. Now, nothing's stopping you from going further. I do like the tokens and all. However, it's good to see the game try to appeal to how much investment you want to put into it. But for probably the most contentious thing about the game, there's quite a few sections where you take control of either Mary Jane or Miles for either investigation or stealth. Don't get too excited about Miles, he doesn't have his fire powers yet. In a bubble, I think these are fine. Granted, there's a lot of times where it feels a little too scripted, like this enemy had to be distracted or you lose, even if it doesn't feel like the enemy was paying attention, but I don't feel like they overstay their welcome. Also glad that you're barely sent that far back if you do get caught. Heck, in Mary Jane's case, she eventually gets the ability to incapacitate enemies, and there is this one in Grand Central Station where she gives instructions for Spider-Man to take them out. This one is pretty fun, not gonna lie. But when paired alongside how well they nailed Spider-Man's gameplay, and how briskly paced everything is, these can feel like huge slowdowns. I can understand why these have become so contentious, some even having second thoughts about multiple playthroughs because of these, but because I can find quick ways through them, and they can get fun in some places, I don't mind them. But that's just me. That said though, I do want to bring up a select number of segments that focus on Peter Parker and his talents as a normal person, specifically. He doesn't get any segments like Mary Jane or Miles, in fact his are mostly story driven, but he does get a lot of puzzles where he has to find a wire configuration with the right voltage, or complete these strands by filling up the empty lines. I find these a very nice change of pace from the action, and a lot more legit good brain teasers. Heck, some even reward you with tokens that you can further use to buy new upgrades or new suits, so I appreciate the diversity. I'm really happy with how much this game offers in terms of content, and yet makes it feel like fun rather than work. It's rewarding you around every corner, and I always love kicking the crap out of goons and one of the bosses, helping out with good environmental activities, or just being a fun, friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. Heck, the DLC chapters take things further in gameplay, since the Monstro swarms are a legit challenge to take on, especially with the brutes with miniguns, which are extremely difficult to web into a wall or on the floor, and can break out of your combo with ease, and those flyers with shields who are always hard to keep track of, especially in crowds. And the shakeouts to previously established ideas are welcome too, like Screwball's challenges and all the photobombs that'll net you extra points if you manage to do what's needed for them that she will gladly point out for you, and the gadget challenges which force you to use specific gadgets you're limited to if you want the best score, which I think are good tests with what you can do. Heck, there's even some more collectible missions to do if you're interested in them, some of which have their own little sub-stories covering the fates of Black Cat's father, Walter Hardy, and even Yuri after the events of Turf Wars, the second chapter, which is really neat. Whether we're talking about the base game or the DLC, except for maybe the crime grinding for full completion, I never got burnt out during my playthrough for this review, or even my previous playthroughs, and I see that as proof of its quality. All the times I've held the game in high regard still apply even today. Every time I play this, I'm always in awe as to how well Spidey's abilities were explored in gameplay, and how well everything was built around it. I'm happy that the story legitimately tries to reveal a larger different scope, yet also the right amount of camping to make every campaign mission feel rewarding, and I truly do get the feeling like everyone involved not only knew Spider-Man to a T, but also love him, and want to give others who love him something to enjoy. I will say though, I can understand where some of its use on a few of its aspects come from, namely the size of it all, some of the completion requirements, and the stealth sections with MJ and Miles. I even understand why some consider Miles Morales a better game because of all that, since the smaller amount of content in that game might be what some people are looking for. Not to mention, despite my preferences, even I can agree that Miles Morales does have legit improvements over this game. But to me personally, even the game's lower points never got in the way of my enjoyment, and the game absolutely soars with a spectrum of red and blue with what it does best. I wholeheartedly recommend you give this game a shot, especially if you love Spider-Man. Heck, give it a shot even if you don't know a bunch about him. Anyone can wear the mask. Anyone can be greater.
So if you decide to pick this game up, if you decide to wear the mask, I hope you enjoy yourself as much as I did. I'm Wing Ripper, and I'll gladly see you all next time.